The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, official HOA letterhead demanding immediate removal of my unauthorized water feature within 14 days or face daily fines of $250. Rebecca Chen, 42, a forensic accountant who'd spent 17 years tracking financial crimes for the federal government before going private, read the complaint twice. Her perfectly legal, fully permitted saltwater pool, the one she'd installed after her architect husband died of cancer 18 months ago, the one therapeutic retreat that helped her sleep through the grief, was suddenly a violation. The complainant's name was listed right there in black and white. Patricia Whitmore, 847 Meadowbrook Lane, directly across the street. The same neighbor who'd smiled at Rebecca's housewarming party 3 years ago. The same woman whose home-based consulting business somehow afforded a lifestyle that never quite added up in Rebecca's professionally trained mind. But this complaint, this vindictive little power play, was about to become Patricia's biggest mistake. Because when you mess with someone who reads financial statements the way most people read grocery lists, you'd better make sure your own books are spotless. Before we dive into how a single HOA complaint triggered an IRS investigation that unraveled years of fraud, if you love stories where entitled behavior backfires spectacularly and justice comes with federal penalties, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that transformed grief into cold calculation, the confrontation where a forensic accountant's curiosity became a weapon, and the resolution where casual cruelty met federal consequences. The first part takes you inside Rebecca's world after loss, how a therapeutic pool became her lifeline, and how one neighbor's entitled complaint wasn't just annoying, it was the spark that ignited professional instincts Rebecca had kept dormant since leaving government work. You'll feel the shift from grief-stricken widow to the sharp investigator she'd always been, the moment she stopped crying and started calculating. The second part reveals the investigation Rebecca never intended to start, but couldn't stop once the patterns emerged. A simple property search became a deep dive into financial records, business licenses, and tax filings. The confrontation wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. You'll witness the exact moment Patricia realized she'd picked the wrong neighbor, challenged the wrong professional, and created evidence of her own downfall. The third part delivers justice that went far beyond HOA drama. Federal agents, forensic audits, and consequences that turned a $250 daily fine into a 6-figure tax penalty. The resolution proves that sometimes the universe doesn't just balance the scales, it drops an anvil on them. Here's exactly how it happened. Rebecca Chen had always been good with numbers. At 42, she'd spent nearly 2 decades following money trails that criminals thought they'd hidden. First with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division, then as a private forensic accountant helping law firms unravel complex fraud cases. She'd left federal work 3 years ago when David got sick, traded government salary for flexible consulting that let her be present for every chemo appointment, every scan, every small victory in a war they ultimately lost. The house at 842 Meadowbrook Lane had been David's dream. Craftsman style with mature oaks and enough backyard space for the pool he'd always wanted. He died 4 months before the permits were approved. Rebecca built it anyway. The saltwater pool wasn't large, just 20 by 40 feet with a shallow end perfect for floating and thinking. Surrounded by the limestone pavers David had picked from a catalog, while still strong enough to have opinions about such things. She'd followed every regulation, hired licensed contractors, submitted plans to both the city and the HOA Architectural Committee, received written approval dated March 15th. She had the stamped documents in a file folder because Rebecca Chen kept records of everything. Swimming helped. The repetitive strokes, the weightlessness, the chlorine smell that masked the hospital antiseptic still lurking in her memory. It was the only hour of each day when her mind went quiet. She swam at dawn before the Texas heat became oppressive, before neighborhood sounds reminded her how alone she was in a house built for two. Patricia Whitmore moved in across the street 8 months after David's funeral. Early 50s, divorced, driving a new Range Rover and wearing clothes that whispered expensive even from a distance. She hosted book clubs Rebecca was never quite invited to, organized neighborhood events with the energy of someone who didn't have an actual job consuming their time. Patricia introduced herself as a lifestyle consultant with a boutique client list, which meant nothing specific and everything vague. Rebecca had smiled politely at the housewarming party, made small talk, and promptly forgot about her. Their interactions were limited to distant waves and the occasional package mishap when delivery drivers confused house numbers. The first complaint came 6 weeks ago, a passive-aggressive HOA notice suggesting Rebecca's frequent pool maintenance was creating excessive noise during quiet hours. Rebecca checked the community guidelines. There were no designated quiet hours for maintenance, and her pool service came at 2 in the afternoon on Wednesdays. She'd responded with documentation, heard nothing back, assumed it was resolved. The second complaint arrived 3 weeks later, claiming her pool equipment was an eyesore visible from the street. Rebecca had personally ensured all equipment was tucked behind decorative screening that matched her fence, exactly as the approved plans specified. She'd responded again with photos and permit numbers, started to feel the prickle of something deliberate in these complaints. Then came the certified letter. 14 days to remove an unauthorized water feature or face $250 daily in violation fines. Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, the morning light cutting across the same granite countertops where she and David had planned their future, and felt something cold and familiar settle into her chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was the calm, focused sensation she used to get when a financial statement didn't quite balance, when the numbers whispered that someone was hiding something. She picked up her phone, called the HOA management office, and spent 20 minutes getting confirmation that yes, her pool was fully permitted, and no, there was no valid basis for the complaint. The manager, a weary-sounding woman named Donna, sighed audibly when Rebecca asked who'd filed the report. "Look, between you and me, Patricia Whitmore has filed 17 complaints this year against various neighbors. We're required to send notices, but most have no merit. I'd ignore it." Rebecca thanked her and hung up. 17 complaints. She pulled up her laptop and started a spreadsheet, because that's what forensic accountants do when patterns emerge. She titled it Meadowbrook Analysis and began with what she knew. Patricia Whitmore, 847 Meadowbrook Lane, lifestyle consultant, boutique client, expensive car, expensive clothes, expensive everything. Rebecca opened the county property appraiser's website and pulled Patricia's records. The house was purchased 18 months ago for $725,000. Cash sale, no mortgage. Interesting. She cross-referenced business licenses. Whitmore Lifestyle Consulting, LLC, registered agent Patricia Whitmore, filed 2 years ago but showing 0 employees besides the owner. Rebecca pulled the Texas Comptroller's public records, no sales tax permit, which meant Patricia claimed her consulting generated no taxable sales in Texas. She checked federal databases she still had access to through her private work. The business had an EIN, but no visible contracts with verifiable companies, no business insurance Rebecca could trace, no professional liability coverage that legitimate consultants carried. Patricia's LinkedIn showed the consulting business but listed no actual clients, no testimonials, nothing concrete. Her social media was carefully curated images of luxury, wine tastings, weekend trips, designer purchases, all funded by a business with no apparent income stream. Rebecca spent the next 2 evenings following the trail. She wasn't hacking or breaking laws. Everything she accessed was public record or information she was licensed to research through her forensic work. Patricia's property taxes were current, paid in full each year from an account at a bank known for private wealth management. Her utility bills suggested she was home frequently, not traveling for client meetings. Her car registration showed she'd purchased the Range Rover new, again with cash 9 months ago. The lifestyle suggested income in the $300,000 range annually, yet her business filings claimed gross receipts under $50,000. The math didn't work. It never worked when someone was lying. Rebecca pulled her old Treasury contacts, asked casual questions about investigation thresholds, reminded herself she was just curious, just scratching a professional itch. Then she found the property records for Patricia's previous address in California. Sold 3 years ago for $1.2 million, right before a very public divorce from a tech executive. Rebecca found the divorce filing. It was sealed, but the peripheral documents weren't. Patricia had walked away with a settlement, exact amount redacted, but the asset disclosure showed rental properties, investment accounts, substantial holdings, so Patricia had money. Old money, divorce money, money she'd moved to Texas and was living off while claiming to run a struggling consulting business. Money she likely wasn't reporting correctly because she thought no one would notice. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, the house silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator David had insisted on upgrading. She thought about the pool complaint sitting on her counter, the threat of fines designed to intimidate her into compliance with a rule that didn't exist. She thought about Patricia's smug smile at neighborhood gatherings, the way she wielded the HOA like a personal weapon, secure in the knowledge that she could make people's lives difficult without consequence. Rebecca opened a new document and began typing, not a response to the HOA, but something else entirely. IRS Form 3949A Information Referral. If Patricia wanted to play games about unauthorized improvements, Rebecca would show her what unauthorized income looked like under federal scrutiny. She spent 4 hours documenting everything: the cash purchase, the luxury lifestyle, the business claims versus observable reality, the potential underreporting of rental income from California properties she still appeared to own based on county records. She attached screenshots, cross-references, a forensic accountant's professional opinion that the numbers suggested possible tax fraud. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't need to. The facts spoke clearly enough to anyone trained to hear them. At midnight, Rebecca hit submit on the IRS portal, watching the confirmation number appear on her screen. Then she drafted her response to the HOA, polite and firm, with copies of every permit and approval, a demand for retraction, and a reminder that filing false complaints could constitute harassment. She sent both emails, shut her laptop, and slept better than she had in weeks. If Patricia wanted to come after her piece, Rebecca would bring the full weight of consequences. Fair was fair. The HOA retraction arrived 4 days later, a terse email from Donna apologizing for the error and confirming Rebecca's pool was in full compliance. The letter mentioned that appropriate guidance had been provided to the complainant about frivolous filings. Rebecca saved it to her file and waited, because she knew how federal investigations worked, slowly, thoroughly, and without warning until they were ready. She went back to her consulting work, swam her morning laps, and watched Patricia's house across the street with the patient attention of someone who'd spent years waiting for criminals to reveal themselves. 3 weeks passed. Rebecca noticed a black sedan parked in front of Patricia's house one Tuesday morning. 2 people in business attire approaching the door with briefcases. They stayed 90 minutes. The sedan returned the following week, this time with a third person. Rebecca didn't need confirmation to know what was happening. IRS agents don't announce themselves with sirens. They arrive in unremarkable cars and ask very specific questions while taking very detailed notes. She saw Patricia through her front window during the second visit, animated and defensive, gesturing sharply while the agents sat impassive with their notepads. The confrontation came on a Saturday morning in late September. Rebecca was trimming roses along her front fence when Patricia's voice cut across the street, sharp and accusatory. "You did this." Rebecca looked up slowly, pruning shears still in hand. Patricia stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, face flushed with anger that made her look older than her careful styling usually suggested. Rebecca set down the shears deliberately and straightened, waiting. "The IRS is auditing me. 3 years of returns. They're going through everything. Bank statements, property records, every transaction. They asked about my consulting business, my income sources, my asset acquisitions. This is you." "I know it's you." Rebecca walked slowly to her own driveway, maintaining the property line between them like a neutral zone. "I'm a forensic accountant, Patricia. I notice patterns. Numbers tell stories to people who know how to read them." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You reported me because of a simple HOA complaint? That's insane. That's vindictive." Rebecca smiled, the same calm expression she'd worn in federal depositions when witnesses tried to intimidate her. "You filed a false complaint trying to force me to remove a fully permitted pool. You used the HOA as a weapon because you thought you could. You never expected anyone to look back at you. That's not the same thing as..." "As what?" "As filing a federal report based on observable evidence of potential tax fraud? Patricia, you bought a $725,000 house with cash. You drive a $70,000 car. Your property taxes alone are $12,000 annually, and you're funding a lifestyle that suggests $300,000 in income, yet your business claims gross receipts under $50,000. Those are just the public numbers. When the IRS looks deeper, and believe me, they're looking, what are they going to find?" Patricia's face went from red to pale. "You had no right to dig into my finances?" Rebecca's voice never rose, stayed conversational and factual. "I accessed public records. Property sales, business registrations, tax filings that anyone can pull. I'm licensed to do this work professionally. What I found suggested a significant discrepancy between your reported income and your observable spending. The IRS takes that seriously, especially when someone appears to be living off unreported assets or income." She paused, let it sink in. "Did you report your California rental income?" "The divorce settlement was 3 years ago. Did you properly account for the distribution of assets? What about the capital gains on the property sale? That's none of your business. It became my business when you decided to harass me over a pool. You picked the wrong neighbor, Patricia. You wanted to flex your HOA influence on someone grieving, someone you thought wouldn't fight back. You miscalculated." Patricia's hands were shaking now, the anger shifting into something closer to fear. "You can't prove anything." Rebecca tilted her head slightly, the gesture almost sympathetic. "I don't have to prove anything. I just had to present enough questions that the IRS decided..." "You're destroying my life over a letter." "No, Patricia. I'm letting the consequences of your choices catch up with you. There's a difference." Rebecca picked up her pruning shears again, a clear dismissal. "If your finances are clean, you have nothing to worry about. If they're not, that's not my problem. It's yours. You should probably call a tax attorney. I can recommend several if you'd like. They're expensive, but then again, you clearly have resources." Patricia stood frozen for a moment, then turned and walked quickly back into her house, her gait stiff and mechanical. Rebecca returned to her roses, trimming with steady precision while her heart rate stayed perfectly calm. She'd spent 17 years confronting people who thought they were smarter than the system. Patricia wasn't even close to the most sophisticated fraud she'd ever unraveled. That evening, Rebecca received an email from Patricia's lawyer A brief message requesting she cease any further investigation or contact. Rebecca replied through her own attorney. A simple statement that she'd filed a single report based on publicly available information, as was her right as a citizen and licensed professional. That she had no ongoing investigation because that wasn't her role, and that any questions about tax matters should be directed to the appropriate federal authorities. She copied the email to her personal files and went swimming, the water cool and perfect under the Texas stars. 2 weeks later, she saw the moving truck. Patricia was loading boxes with the help of professional movers, her Range Rover already packed with personal items. Rebecca learned from Donna at the next HOA meeting that Patricia had put the house up for sale, a quiet listing that sold below market within days. She said something about relocating for business, Donna mentioned with a knowing look. But between us, I heard the IRS put a lien on the property for unpaid taxes. She had to sell to settle. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully, sipped her coffee, and said nothing. She didn't need to. The neighborhood was quieter after Patricia left, fewer complaints, fewer power plays, fewer residents walking on eggshells around someone who'd weaponized minor rules. Rebecca swam her laps each morning and slept soundly at night. The pool David never got to use now serving as both memorial and reminder that some battles are worth fighting, even when you'd rather just grieve in peace. The full scope of Patricia's situation became clear 3 months later when Rebecca received a courtesy call from her former colleague at Treasury, someone she'd worked cases with during her federal years. "That referral you filed," Marcus said without preamble. "Wanted to let you know it hit big. We don't usually provide updates on civilian reports, but given your history with the department and the quality of your documentation, thought you'd want to know the outcome." Rebecca pulled out a notepad, old habits dying hard. "I appreciate that. What did you find?" Marcus whistled low through the phone. "Your instincts were dead on. Patricia Whitmore had been systematically underreporting income for 4 years. The divorce settlement included 3 rental properties in California that were generating $90,000 annually, never reported. She'd also established a shell consulting LLC that existed purely to move money between accounts and create artificial business expenses. She was claiming $50,000 in income while actually pulling down close to $400,000 between rents, investment returns, and distributions from accounts she'd hidden in the business structure. The cash purchase of the Texas property was funded by liquidating investments she never reported the gains on. Total tax liability came to $218,000, plus penalties and interest. We're looking at just over $300,000 she owes now. Rebecca absorbed the numbers, her mind automatically calculating the exposure. Is she cooperating? She tried to fight it initially, hired an aggressive tax attorney who argued everything was a misunderstanding, poor record-keeping, honest mistakes. But your initial report gave us enough threads to pull, and once we started, the whole thing unraveled. She eventually agreed to a settlement, full payment over 3 years, including penalties. She sold the Texas house to cover the first installment. She's living in a rental now, still in Texas but smaller circumstances. The California properties are being liquidated to cover the rest. Marcus paused. Word of advice, though, she knows you filed the report. Her attorney tried to claim harassment, retaliatory reporting, but it didn't stick since everything you documented was accurate and legally obtained. Still, watch your back. Rebecca smiled at her reflection in the kitchen window. She already tried confronting me. Her lawyer sent a cease and desist. I'm not worried. Yeah, well, you never worried about the right things anyway. That's why you were good at this work. They talked for a few more minutes about mutual colleagues and old cases before hanging up. Rebecca stood at her counter, the same granite David had picked out, and felt something settle in her chest that wasn't quite satisfaction, but close enough. She hadn't set out to destroy Patricia's life. She'd simply responded to aggression with information. weaponized her professional expertise the way Patricia had weaponized the HOA. Fair was fair. The neighborhood noticed the change immediately. Without Patricia's constant complaints, the HOA meetings became functional instead of combative. Other residents confided in Rebecca about previous harassment they'd endured. The single dad 2 houses down, who'd been reported for his children's excessive outdoor play. The retired teacher across the street who'd been cited for her garden gnomes. The young couple next door who'd been threatened with fines for their contractor's truck being parked overnight during renovations. Patricia had wielded petty power against everyone, secure in her ability to make life difficult without consequences. Her sudden departure felt like a collective exhale. Rebecca saw the final moving truck on a cold November morning. Patricia's rental agreement apparently ended. She didn't know where her former neighbor relocated, didn't care enough to find out. The house sold quickly to a young family with twin toddlers who immediately loved the neighborhood's mature trees and quiet streets. Rebecca brought them cookies on moving day, welcomed them with the kind of genuine warmth she'd never received from Patricia. The mother mentioned they'd gotten the house below market because the previous owner needed a quick sale. Rebecca smiled and said something about timing working out perfectly for everyone. 4 months after Patricia left, Rebecca had her first HOA board meeting as the newly elected treasurer, a position she'd reluctantly accepted after Donna personally asked her to run. "We need someone who actually understands finances and won't let power go to their head," Donna had said. "Someone who will protect residents instead of terrorizing them." Rebecca agreed on the condition that they revamp the complaint process to prevent abuse. She drafted new guidelines requiring complaints to cite specific violations with supporting evidence, implemented a review committee, and established consequences for filing frivolous reports. The board approved everything unanimously. She was reviewing the HOA budget one evening when her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She answered out of curiosity. The voice was female, hesitant, not Patricia, but familiar somehow. "Miss Chen? This is Amanda Whitmore, Patricia's daughter. I'm calling to apologize." Rebecca set down her pen, surprised. "You don't need to apologize for your mother's actions." "I know, but I wanted you to understand. My mom got really bitter after the divorce. She had all this money but felt cheated somehow. Angry at the world. She thought she could treat people however she wanted because she had resources. What you did, exposing the tax fraud, it actually helped her in a weird way. She had to face consequences for once. She's in therapy now, trying to rebuild her life without the entitlement. I don't think she'll ever admit you did her a favor, but I wanted you to know it wasn't just punishment. It was a wake-up call she desperately needed." Rebecca processed this, the complexity of human behavior and consequences. "I appreciate you calling, Amanda. I never wanted to hurt her. I just wanted her to stop hurting me. I understand. And for what it's worth, she does too now. It took losing everything for her to realize what she'd become." They talked for a few more minutes before Amanda thanked her again and hung up. Rebecca sat in the quiet house. The evening light fading through the windows David had insisted on upgrading for better natural illumination. She thought about justice and karma, about the difference between revenge and accountability. That weekend, Rebecca hosted her first social gathering since David's death. A small barbecue for the new neighbors and a few other families on the street. She swam laps before everyone arrived, the morning water calm and therapeutic. As she floated on her back, staring at the sky through the oak branches David had loved, she felt something like peace settle over her. The pool that had been weaponized against her was exactly what it was always meant to be. A sanctuary, a memorial, a place where the noise of the world went quiet and grief became manageable. She thought about Patricia occasionally, wondered if the lessons stuck or if old patterns would reassert themselves in time. But mostly she didn't think about her former neighbor at all. Rebecca had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was simply living well while ensuring that actions had appropriate consequences. She'd spent 17 years of her career following money trails and holding people accountable for financial crimes. Patricia's mistake was thinking that expertise went dormant when Rebecca left government work, that grief made her weak or passive. Instead, she'd simply reminded one entitled woman that in a world of numbers and evidence, the truth always balances eventually. Rebecca Chen, 42 years old, forensic accountant and widow, dried off from her swim and started preparing food for guests who actually valued kindness over power. The house felt less empty with laughter planned for later. The pool sparkled in the morning sun, fully legal, fully enjoyed, and finally at peace. 3 states away in Portland, Oregon, a retired federal prosecutor named Michael Torres was unlocking his small bookshop when the woman stormed in, demanding he close his disability parking spot because it made her boutique look less exclusive. Michael, who'd spent 30 years litigating civil rights cases and happened to use that spot due to a service-related injury, smiled the quiet smile that once preceded courtroom devastation. He pulled out his phone, already recording, and asked her to repeat herself clearly. "I'd love to document this concern for the city council," he said mildly. As the chair of the Small Business Association, "I'm sure they'll find your discrimination against ADA compliance absolutely fascinating." The woman's face went sheet white as she realized who she'd just threatened.